Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. My guest today is Raj Vinnakota, president of the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, formerly known as the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation. Prior to joining ICS, Raj served as the EVP of the Youth and Engagement Division at the Aspen Institute. He was co-founder and CEO of the Seed Foundation, the nation's first network of public college preparatory boarding schools for underserved children. Raj's perspective is grounded in years of work with college presidents, faculty, employers, and Gen Z leaders, all pointing to the same conclusion. In an AI-driven, mistrust-heavy decade, America's future hinges on rebuilding the human abilities that create credibility, trust, and real problem-solving across differences. And he joins me to talk about the groundbreaking work he and ISC are doing in building civics and teaching civil discourse in today's highly politicized world. Raj, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me here. It's a real honor.
It's my pleasure, sir. I am looking forward to a great conversation. You have an amazing background. We're going to talk about, what's going on in higher ed and what you're doing there at the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, formerly the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation. Before we get into that, tell the audience a little bit about you and how you got here.
Sure. I can talk about it geographically and kind of a life way too. So I'm actually born in Switzerland, of all places. And
my wife would love you. That's her favorite country.
Yeah. So born in Lausanne to two Indian parents. And then we moved to the US when I was 8. My dad was a professor. And so we moved to Milwaukee, where my dad was a professor at Marquette University for 35 years. And
wow,
after
Marquette's a great school.
And Milwaukee was a great place to grow up. I then went to college out east. I went to Princeton and I majored in molecular biology. I think we're both scientists by training here, so we can talk about.
Yeah, but you're the smart one, I think.
Well, yeah. But maybe I should just stop talking now then, if that's what we want to prove. But I'm a molecular biologist. I studied the virology and wanted to get involved in the cure for AIDS. A little burned out by college, ended up as a management consultant. And then my first big decision was I came up with this idea of starting a boarding school for inner city children. And I ended up finding a business partner. And in 1997, we both left our jobs. And a year later, we opened the nation's first urban public boarding school, the Seed School of Washington, D.C., which opened with 40 students, 20 boys and 20 girls, who all came from inner city D.C. And we picked ping pong balls out of a lottery machine to select who would attend our school. And it was, I called it both the happiest and saddest day of the year for me, because you saw the excitement of the families whose balls got selected and the not so excitement and sadness of those who didn't. And we started that school and we grew it to more than 300 students. And over the next 18 years, I co-led this project and opened a second school in West Baltimore, a third school in Miami Gardens. And we sent, hundreds, thousands off into the world to colleges, graduating at a really high percentage from 4 and 2 year institutions. So it was an incredible journey for me to do my work. And then in 2015, I got a fairly random outreach from Walter Isaacson, who was then the CEO of the Aspen Institute.
Sure.
And Walter asked me whether I'd be interested in helping him start a third operating division at the Aspen Institute, focused on working directly with young people. And 18 years was a nice long run of co-leading Seed. And so I went off to the Aspen Institute and I spent the next 3 years standing up a division focused on working with 14 to 24-year-olds. And I decided to make the focus of our work around this notion of how does one develop civic virtue in young people, right? The Aristotelian conception that says you need to actually raise citizens who believe in the needs of the community over their own personal interests. But you don't just have happening. You actually have to develop it. You have to teach it. You have to have a culture around it. And so that was my intellectual interest. And for those 3 years, we started a group of fellowships and did a whole set of programming around those notions. In 2018, Walter retired, and I left soon after that because, frankly, I said, our democracy house is on fire, and I want to get more closely working on those issues. And I ended up syndicating a national study to rethink civic education. And my 3 funders were the Hewlett Foundation, Michael Bloomberg, and Charles and David Koch. Which
really
is
interesting.
Yeah, which is the first time those 3 funders had come together in a joint project.
Wow.
But I thought it was an incredible signaling device to say there are certain things that are worthy of investment, no matter your ideological background. And frankly, what could be more important in how we educate the next generation in self-government, right? Because that's what civic education is in its essence.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
And then now here at the Institute for
That's right.
Citizens and Scholars. That's, most folks have heard of the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation. You've changed the name, but you're doing a lot of the same type of things. Tell us about ICS, please.
Sure. So it was right when I was finishing up that research that I was approached about the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship presidency. And I have to be honest with you, I first said, I'm not sure about this job because you do great work in higher education, pipelines into the professoriate, educating K-12 teachers to be better STEM teachers. But I think that the single greatest education problem we have in this country is we've forgotten how to develop citizens. And that needs to be a focus, not just of higher education, but also K-12, of our communities, of our work online and our work in the workplace. And they said, come on in, give us the pitch. And so I did. And I did end up becoming president. And so I joined in July of 2019.
Wow.
And Drumm, I spent the next year building out a strategy. In a couple sentences, basically, it says there are 68 million young people between the ages of 10 and 24 who are entering the public square in the next decade. If we do a good job of developing them into the citizens we need, we'll be fine as a country. But that requires that we work at scale in higher education, in the workplace, in K-12, and in our communities. And so our work is focused around 3 of those 4. We have other people who are doing great work in the K-12 system, and so we focus on the other 3.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting that you are a guest on the show today because we're all seeing this highly politicized environment that we're operating in. We've learned to talk past each other, and we're going for the soundbite online quotes, sound bites for television, radio, whatever the medium is. And it's almost like we don't care what the other people are saying. We've got to get our own opinion out there because we know we're right.
Yes. Unfortunately, I think very few of us practice intellectual humility right now, or frankly,
what is that? What is empathy, intellectual humility? Come on. What are these terms? Nobody knows about these.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I think so many of us do. I'll use a very specific example that, will unfortunately date me, which is, you remember the scientific method, right? The scientific method, exactly, was all about intellectual humility. You did research, you developed a hypothesis, which is an educated guess. And then you did a series of experiments and you determined whether or not your hypothesis was correct. And if you're dealing in true science, 98 times out of 100, your hypothesis would be wrong. You had to modify it, you learned from it, and you did it again, and you did it again, and you learned, and you got better and better. That's a form of intellectual humility that hopefully most of us learned at some point in our education.
Well, we do the same thing when we go in and do a client project, whether it be, a governance, board governance, shared governance, not so much accreditation, but those board and shared governance, is we come in and after interviews or surveys, got a good idea what's going on. We present that back to the leadership team and they say yes, no, nuanced, et cetera. And we go back it's that same approach. We call it a stakeholder involvement or stakeholder attunement and input process, but it's the same type of thing. You get a hypothesis, you test it, you go back, revise, and finally you get to the point where you go, this is it.
That's right. That's right. And even then, you're still testing it, and there's still a bit of learning that's going on all the time and iteration.
Yeah. And your best consultants know that one size doesn't fit all. I mean, you'll have clients come in and they'll ask you, and you being a management consultant before, you understand this. You'll have a client come in and will say, what are you going to do for me and how much is it going to cost? And there's sometimes I can say, well, it's XYZ and this is what it's cost. But 95% of the time, it's like, I don't know. I don't know what your problems are. I don't know, where you've been, what you've done so far. Let's have a conversation. Let's figure it out. Then I'll send you a proposal or I'll send you a outline of what I think it is. You tell me if this is right.
And I had clients as large as Nations Bank, right? Formerly now part of Bank of America, to the Bank of New South Wales in Australia. So many different details and variables are different. And understanding what the makeup and the situation is so important before you can even determine how you're going to tackle the problem.
Which is why I think what you're doing at ICS is incredible. College Presidents for Civic Preparedness.
That's right.
That is incredible. I want to know more.
Sure. So it was fairly soon after we developed our strategy in late 2020 that I started reaching out to college presidents directly with a very simple question. I said, how are you civically preparing your students? And I told you a little bit about my broad, diverse array of funders before in my previous work. I, in a similar fashion, chose a broad array of college presidents to talk to. So some of them included Michael Roth at Wesleyan, Jonathan Holloway, then at Rutgers, Mitch Daniels at Purdue, Hiram Chodosh at Claremont McKenna College, Wayne Fredericks at Howard, Joan Gable at the University of Minnesota, Rosalind Artis at Benedict College. And I picked this broad array of presidents, and they gave me very different specific answers, Drumm, but there were two themes that were consistent across all of the answers. The first theme was simply that the pendulum had swung too far to higher education being viewed largely as just a private good. And we needed to bring the public good responsibility of higher education back into play and in balance with that. So what do I mean? Yes, it's really important to graduate your students and make sure that they get a job. But it is also important that our colleges and universities are also preparing our students to be good citizens and that our institutions are bulwarks for democracy. And frankly, that was being lost. And we needed to bring that back into balance. And every single president said that.
So this is interesting. When did you start to roll this out and have these conversations? This was in
very late 2020. It was, late 2020, early 2021 during the pandemic.
Okay. So because I've spoken quite a number of times about administrations and the regulatory environment for education. When you have the Democrats, the pendulum swings one way. When you have the Republicans, it swings the other way. With that, you're saying the same thing. I always think about the Clark Kerr model, higher ed for the public good. And what we have seen is it swung too much to the private good. I really like the way you language that.
Yes. That if we focus solely on just kind of the short term, what do you do for me so I get a job? Colleges and universities, frankly, lose a bit of their soul, and they lose a lot of the reason why we created these institutions in the first place. And every president recognized that. Now, let me tell you the second theme, which was related but separate, right? So the first one is that colleges and universities need to regain their public good responsibilities. The second one was when these presidents tried to take on this challenge with bold approaches, that the pushback from stakeholders made it nearly impossible to sustain the work. Now, it's interesting. The stakeholders could be different in different moments and different institutions, right? They could be boards, donors, alumni. They could be students, faculty, administrators, or policymakers, legislators, community leaders, families, and parents. So it was different in different circumstances, but every time this blowback made it very difficult for them to continue the bold work.
Interesting.
Now, we kept hearing this over and over again. Finally, we said, wait a second, would there be value in bringing these presidents together? Think of it as a coalition of the willing, right? The collective power of these presidents who could work with each other, learn from each other, be able to push forward this mandate. And a number of presidents raised their hands. So we said, okay, let's start talking. And so we started virtually, and then we moved to in-person. And finally, in January of 2023, we decided that we would announce ourselves publicly that year as College Presidents for Civic Preparedness. And so we had 14 presidents who we publicly announced this work with in August of 2023.
And now you've got 135?
We have 135 college presidents. Yes, it has grown quite substantially, quite quickly.
Everything from community colleges, 2 years, all the way up to R1s.
That's right. That's actually been one of the joys and one of the things that the presidents tell us that they get real value from, right? We have Ivy League schools, the Dartmouths, Cornells of the world, the elite liberal arts I just talked about, Wesleyan and Wellesley and Amherst and Denison and so on. We have large public states, University of Wisconsin, Rutgers, Pitt, University of North Texas. We have regional universities, Montclair State University, James Madison University. We have community colleges. We have small liberal arts colleges. We have religious institutions. It's a really broad array and not easily categorizable. That's actually what makes it so great.
That is fabulous. I want to dig down more on CP squared, as you call it.
Sure, yes.
You said there are 3 basic tenets to that.
That's right. So let me tell you a little bit about the story. So when presidents sign up for this, they recognize that we're trying to focus on the 3 essential civic skills that we're trying to build in students that they've said they could use help on. The first is, how do we teach students to be able to engage in productive conversations, right? Call it civil discourse, constructive dialogue is a different term, but we talk about it as productive conversations. The second is, how do they discern and use credible information, right? There's so much coming at them. How do we know that what's the right information that they can use?
You mean everything that I read on is not true?
Oh, do you have time for a whole separate podcast?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so,
No.
And then the third skill, which is really important because it brings it all together, is working and developing the skill for collaborative problem solving across difference. So it's not enough to just be able to engage in productive conversations. It's not enough to just understand where your information comes from. You then have to translate that into doing the work, working with people with whom you may not necessarily agree, but actually getting things done. So these 3 essential skills are the ones that we focus on, and our presidents have said we would really benefit from a coalition working on this together.
It reminds me of one of my favorite movies, The American President, with Michael Douglas and Annette Bening, and the speech that Michael Douglas gives at the end about what free speech is. You know, being able to listen to someone whose position you literally hate. He or she has that same right to the speech that you do. So
Right.
How do you reach across those differences to collaboratively problem solve? I mean, that's brilliant.
And it's hard work. The thing I would say, Drumm, is that when we first got into this, we said any president should sign up and point to what work they're doing on their campus around this. And we have, as you noted, 135 presidents who are engaged in this work. What became clear to us, however, is that every one of our partner schools has a center on campus. All of them have some faculty members who do this work really well. And all of them bring outside speakers to model what it means to engage in this kind of discourse. However, a majority of this work is for opt-in students, right? So you have to opt into the work. And unfortunately, that means that a majority of the students at most campuses don't actually learn about this or have opportunities to practice it over and over. It's like building a muscle. And so we started working with our presidents and saying, you can't just do this for a few students. How do we get to actually changing campus culture so that every student has the opportunity to learn and practice these skills multiple times a year? And so at that point, this becomes a real massive institutional undertaking. How do you put it in orientation? How does it go into the curriculum? Is it in the general education? Is it in freshman seminar? Is it part of some different programs, right? How is it in the co-curricular and extracurricular activities? For those schools that have a residential staff, how is it in residential life? How do we make it part of the culture of the institution? And to me, the most exciting part is that we now have 42 of our presidents who are engaged and many more who are continuing to line up in this work of campus culture change. And we're learning so much. Just like you said earlier, you have so many different types of people. We have so many different kinds of clients. We have so many different types of schools, and we're learning so much about how does this work on a community college? How does this work on a commuter school? How does this work in an elite Ivy League school? And what can we learn from each that we can share with others in trying to drive this campus culture change?
And that is so critical because when you take a look at right-leaning schools, everybody at a different campus is woke. When you look at a left-leaning school, everybody at the right-leaning school is too authoritarian. You've got to be able to bridge that. And I think the way you're doing it about bringing this into the students is brilliant because it's, people tell me, oh my gosh, look at these students nowadays. They're ridiculous. We can't teach these people. And I'm going, hey, these are the folks who are going to be taking care of us when we get old. You better learn how to do this. You better learn how to converse with them, to understand what's important to them.
It's so critical. And the interesting thing is that I would say the momentum of our programming and the fact that so many college presidents are getting such value is really having a flywheel effect, right? More schools are recognizing this, more schools are joining us so they can be part of this movement and working alongside us. It is exciting, and it's especially exciting when you hear stories of how students are incorporating this when they're seeing difference and maybe starting a club or starting a set of dinner sessions so that they can speak with each other, people with very different political views, all the way, Drumm, to what you just said. Macalester College actually has a partnership with a school close to them, Northwestern, where they have students, very different perspectives, very different ideologies, but they engage together along with the presidents and they learn so much about each other, right? And so you can even take it beyond campus in that way.
And to me, it sounds like it's beyond the quote debate society.
That's
it's developing relationships, friendships with other folks you may not have wanted to speak with before, and learning how to have civil discourse and understanding what makes that person tick. I remember years ago, somebody telling me, you don't know another person till you've walked a mile in their shoes. And this to me sounds like that's what you're doing.
That's absolutely true. I would say, so I'm actually, full disclosure, I'm a debater from high school and college. So I loved debate. And I think debate is important, but I've actually recently written about the fact that debate in and of itself is not sufficient. You also need discourse and dialogue, right? Because debate helps you really sharpen your points of view, but it doesn't help you convince other people and how to engage and collaboratively problem solve, right? Debate is about winning. Discourse, dialogue is about how we collaborate. Now, both are important, But I think we focus and role model and spend too much time on the debate side of it. We also need to append the discourse portion.
I couldn't agree more. I'm also thinking about this from a how do you do it with students? And obviously, orientation is one of those, but your faculty need, because I would be willing to bet there can be some pretty heated conversations, or I'm sorry, heated dialogue around topics. I would guess that you've got to develop the faculty's muscle to be able to, for lack of a better word, referee.
It's a great point. So I'll tell you a little story. In January of 2023, when we decided that we would publicly announce later in the year, and we also were deciding what will be our first 2 or 3 areas that we would really focus on. The number one choice from all of our presidents in the room was they asked us, they said, Raj, we have nowhere to send our faculty to learn how to bring contentious issues in the classroom effectively. And you know what I said, Drumm? I said, that can't be true. So we did a quick landscape analysis. And what we determined is that there were pockets, there were certain professors at certain schools who were really good, who were teaching their peers and other colleagues. But there was no place to actually send faculty to learn this. So we actually have stood up a faculty institute. We actually did it within 5 months. And we've now had more than 5 sessions with 155 faculty members from more than 60 institutions who come for 2.5 days to spend with us to both learn about what different practices look like, what can be incorporated, what other principles faculty members are using, and then actually even practice it in the room on difficult conversations. And then part of those faculty members' commitment is to go back to their campus, both incorporate it into one of their syllabi or curriculum and classes, and if possible, also be a train the trainer. Teach others what they've learned on their campus so that you have many more faculty members who start to learn about this. And that faculty institute has just been a powerful, powerful mechanism.
Well, that my Navy pilot is coming out at this point. That was the purpose of Top Gun, to train fighter pilots on the art of dogfighting so they could go back to their squadrons and train other pilots.
Got it. I did not realize that. I did not realize there was a train the trainer piece to that as well.
Yes, there is. And what's interesting is you've touched the tip of the iceberg with schools, with faculty. And what I think about is the iceberg theory of change. You've probably heard of it. You've got, 9% or 12% of the iceberg above the water. And you've got below the water, you've got 90%. At the bottom of the iceberg, you've got structure and then your processes. And then above, you've got the output. The water, you can use the model as mental models, but you've got to be able to change processes. You've got to be able to change structures to make any change in the way the iceberg looks above the water.
So I love that analogy. Let me tell you why. As we were doing this, so we would host these faculty institutes in different institutions, and you'd have 30 or so come, and so you have 2 faculty members from different institutions come. And our presidents kept telling us 2 things. The first was, this was really great for my faculty members who came. But the other thing they said is, Raj, we can't do a Noah's Ark of Faculty Institute. I can't send them 2 by 2. I'll never get to a critical mass. And so one of the things that we're actually piloting and testing this year is we are now going to campuses. We're going to 5 very different schools and testing, can we actually support 20, 30, 40, 50 faculty members at once at one institution and do both the programming and then the community of practice support so that you build a critical mass that starts to drive this. Understanding that the presidents are very well aware that there also needs to be processes that need to be considered. But if you've got a group of owners, of faculty members who are like, yes, this is very good, I've learned a lot from it, and I've linked arms with other faculty members because I believe in this, having those champions on campus is so critical to this work.
Oh, it is. And when I think about it, what comes to mind is the sins of the father, the sins of the son. faculty members are experts in their discipline. They're not necessarily experts in pedagogy.
Right.
It's still the sage on the stage. So how do you change those processes? How do you change those structures to implement the wide scale change you're looking for?
And Drumm, let me make the question even more difficult here, right?
Oh, thanks.
Exactly, which is most faculty members don't get professional development around teaching during their
They
time,
don't.
right? They don't get evaluated around their teaching. Maybe they get student evaluations, but from what I hear, 60 years ago, you'd have professors going into each other's classrooms and sit in the back and just literally listen to each other. That doesn't happen. And
No.
your promotion decisions really aren't dependent upon your teaching. So
It's all research.
remember the systems thing you just brought up, 5 minutes earlier. So setting up those systems to support this, to elevate this, to champion this, while we're also doing the professional development needs to go hand in hand. That's the only way you'll get to the eventual systems change. You need to be able to put all of these things into the conversation.
You've got to change your structures. You've got to change your processes. And most importantly, you need to change people's mental models
That's
so
right.
they're willing to accept this.
The interesting thing is the mental models in many ways is easier because so many, from at least my experience, so many people go into academia loving their content and wanting to figure out ways to disseminate and educate, right? You got to have an education bone in your body to want to go into higher education. So as long as you can tap into that, there's a lot of energy and leverage. And so the mental model part then becomes how can we teach you and give you tools and support and communities of practice and other people you can talk to so that you can do this well.
And it also comes back to you get what you measure.
That's right. And here's an interesting piece. So one of the things that's a foundation to our culture change work with those 42 schools that are kind of at the leading edge of our work with us is that they've all committed to having a shared set of measures around productive conversations, credible information, and collaborative problem solving. So we're going to learn so much from those, not only at the intervention level, right? The specific thing you're doing, like orientation change and so on, but also the campus climate survey level to know whether or not it's actually impacting the DNA of the institution. So we're going to learn so much, and we'll be able to use that as a learning mechanism to share with our institutions. How are we doing? And what things seem to be working and what things probably need more tweaking. That's going to be very, very powerful.
I think so. If somebody wants to learn more about this from a college president or faculty perspective, how do they get in touch with you?
It's very easy. Our website on this work is collegepresidents.org. So you can just go to collegepresidents.org and learn more about College Presidents for Civic Preparedness, or as we call it, CP Squared. And you can get in touch with us. Any member of the campus can get in touch with us and learn more. You can also see the list of all 135 presidents who are part of this work right now.
That sounds great. This has been fabulous for me, Raj. I enjoy all of my guests that come on, but when somebody like yourself gives a new take on solving a long problem, I lap it up. So thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I don't want to take all the credit. This is a big coalition, institution leaders, people who are working on this team. It's a joy and it's a journey at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to give a shout out to those folks who have been funding all of this great work for you?
Well, one of the joys here is that we have such a broad array of funders. So we have everyone from organizations like the ECMC Foundation and Lumina Foundation, Stand Together, Arthur Vining Davis Foundation, a number of collaborators of individual donors like the Einhorn Collaborative, the Tepper Foundation, and so on, 1-8 Foundation. So it's been great in just the broad array that we've been able to bring together.
Nice. 3 takeaways for university presidents and boards. How do you build collaborative problem solving and build in the civic discourse that we so much need?
Well, the first thing I'd say is don't do this alone. Join our coalition or another coalition or share best practices. this is hard work. The presidents know that, but being able to do it collectively has much more power and will accelerate your work. The second is to recognize that people might not trust higher education. Not everyone does, but actually most do. But they still trust their local university and college, right?
Yes.
So keep building trust by engaging your local community in all of the work that you do. And then third and finally is center students in your planning and your conversations, whether it's at a committee level or some council or so on or so forth. Bring student voice into that. I find that it always provides you with a different perspective of whether or not you're actually making an impact. And so having that voice in the room is critical.
Yeah, those are great takeaways. Thank you. What's next for you? What's next for ICF?
Well, so look, this work with citizens and scholars is generational work. So it's really about how do we continue to double down, have more college presence. Please join us. Please reach out to me if you'd like, and also be our partners in this work. This is about making sure that we have the democracy that we want, a flourishing civil society, and it's going to require all of us to engage on this.
So true. Raj, thank you so much for being on the program. This has been a fabulous conversation for me. I really appreciate it.
It's been a joy for me too. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening today, and a special thank you to my guest, Raj Vinnakota. Raj, thank you so much for being on the program. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. It was a great insight into what you're doing there, what you and your team are doing there at ICS, and thank you for that work. To my listeners, thanks for tuning in. See you next week.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.